Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good evening to tonight's episode of welcome to Night City Sofa. That's better. I know what I'm saying. It's written down. I'm not even reading it. I am Jessica or Jess, and joining me tonight is a very dear friend, Easy Dice. Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Good. So for those of you who may not know me, I stream randomly here on Twitch a few games, but I also play Cyberpunk RED over on Saves First Death every Saturday as Media Moxie 11, who is constantly frustrated with her crew. We're trying to solve through. It's a great game. The other characters are fantastic, and we have a lot of fun. So yeah, that's where you can find me. You can find me here or over on Saves First Death. Easy, if you'd like to let people know who you are, how awesome you are, and where they can find you.
Of course, yeah. So, I'm Easy, and you can also find me over Easy Dice here on Twitch, or you can find me on the Twitter. It will always be Twitter, and I will always say that until the end of time. And also, on the main fact that, you can also find me on YouTube over on Demon and Dice is the channel where I am with my co-host there, Zafkiel Toxic. Mostly on the things that I do is, aside from that, I also work with music projects and try to produce music libraries for free use for people's projects on YouTube, as well as free use for that of Twitch. So if you need anything like that, there's things you can find there for that. And I'm also a voiceover artist and am currently working on Audible.
Nice.
So
I just realized my commands aren't working for no apparent reason. So that's real unfortunate. But follow Easy on here on Twitch at the very least. You can click the little @ symbol in the title, and you can do that, or in the wonderful places that he mentioned. Yeah. I tried to quick troubleshoot, and everything seems to be working, so I don't know why it's not working. Everything's on. I thought
we're doing it live. It's fine. We're doing it live.
I was like, oh, maybe I didn't put it in capitals. Nope, that's not it. It just. So yeah, go follow. He's absolutely wonderful, and he will bring a smile to your face. So follow Easy. Before we get into the show itself, I want to remind you all that if you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to ask in chat. If you are watching the show on YouTube after the fact, post your comments below, and I'll respond to them as soon as I can. And continuing on for the show tonight, we are going to be talking about Cyberpunk RED Easy Mode. This is a 46-page booklet, and it's a great introduction to the world and system of Cyberpunk RED, especially if you're new to it. It can be purchased on DriveThruRPG for free if you get the PDF version, no cost to you, or you can get it print on demand at cost plus shipping through DriveThruRPG as well, if you would prefer a physical book, because physical books are always nice. So those.
Do you like physical books?
Yes, me too. So those options are available to you. Even if you're not new to to Cyberpunk RED, I find that Easy Mode is a great grab and kind of a refresher booklet to remember what's going on with the world. Because even as I go back through and prepare for the show, I'm like, oh yeah. So super handy to have around as a reference. Now, since this is... Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, it's completely fine. I was just going to say, as someone that is basically blanketly completely new to it, having a, item that says Easy Mode is definitely, hopefully, a way more digestible for lore purposes, and easier to dip your toes in, for sure.
Yeah, it is. And we did cover the first part, which is the lore, in part 1. So if you missed that, it's up on the YouTube, and you can go on my YouTube channel and go and check that out. If you learn best by listening, as opposed to reading, which some people do. So tonight, and it's one of the reasons also overwhelming learning a new system, we broke it down into segments. Tonight's segment, we're going to go through playing the game, which is essentially the mechanics portion of Cyberpunk RED. So now that you know all the history and the lore and theory, or if you're just sitting down and you've been given a character sheet and you're going to roll dice, we're going to talk about the very basics that you need to know to play the game. So, let's see, what is next? Whether you're the game master or a player, there's lots of information you're going to need to know. Easy mode starts with the two major character abilities, which are stats and skills, since that's what your players or you as the GM are going to be rolling most of the time. Stats describe your character's natural abilities, essentially how they were, like your naturally born abilities, what you can do. Skills represent what your character can do via training and learning. So, for example, I am not very, dexterous. Dexterity would be the closest stat. I trip on air often. I trip upstairs. My dexterity, which is the way your body moves, is very low. Now, because of childhood and my mother constantly telling me that I sounded like an elephant whenever I have walked, my stealth skill is very high because I learned to walk very quietly when I was a kid so as to not disrupt, so that I wouldn't be loud. So you can still have a low stat, but be good overall in a skill because you've put the points in training into that. So far, so good? Okay.
I believe so. Okay.
Alright, Easy's here to make sure that everything I say makes sense from a new player perspective.
Don't worry, Chad, I got you.
Yep.
Right now, listen. So if I understand that correctly, let me just follow through here.
Yes.
So, if dexterity is what is basically the moniker of your arrangement of movement, then your stealth is basically that of the dampening and auditorio of your movement.
It's more the time that you've put in training your body and how to properly muffle movements.
Okay, gotcha. So it's more, while dexterity is your range of movement, the stealth will be more of your control of your movement.
Yeah, so that's what one is. So
Okay.
Dexterity is your stat, stealth is your skill. Your
Got
skill,
it. Okay.
every skill will always have a stat that it links to.
Got it. Okay.
Now in Cyberpunk RED, there are 10 different stats. And at character creation, without cyberware, no stat can be higher than an 8, and nothing can be lower than a 2. So you will always have at least a 2 in anything. You cannot go over 8. 5, I think 5 is considered just average, or around average, so anything above 5, you're considered exceptional at what you do. Or better than average, however you want to look at it. So we're going to go over the stats, starting with intelligence, because I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. But not only is it how bright and clever that your character could be, but that it affects your education skills, but it's also your awareness. So that's going to affect perception, your ability to conceal or reveal an object, knowing where someone might hide something or the best place to hide it, as well as your tracking skills. So if you're trying to follow someone, that all links to intelligence. So it's awareness as well as general educational skills or book learning. Reflexes represent your response time and coordination. I like to think coordination as specifically your hand-eye coordination. So this stat is used for ranged weapons specifically, and any drive or pilot skills. It's also going to be the stat that you use for initiative. And I know a lot of people coming from the 5e fantasy game are used to dexterity being that stat for initiative. It's not in Cyberpunk Red. It is your reflexes, because it is your reaction time. It's how fast you are. All those hours you sit spending with a controller playing video games like we all do, and you've, like, earned that quick hand eye reflexes, that reaction time, that is reflexes.
I put in my time with my Souls games. I've earned my reflexes. I've got this.
Hells yeah. Okay, sorry, just double checking chat. So dexterity is, like I said, it's your natural athletic ability, the coordination of your body movements. It's how well you know your body and how much like force you can use. So it'll affect your melee weapons attacks, your brawling, but also because you're moving stealth, contortionist, your athletics, so running if you have to climb something. Also, if you're throwing a grenade, kind of like throwing a baseball, how much force you need to move your body in the right, muscles to use the movement to do, that's all dexterity. So dexterity is your body, reflexes is hand, eye, and reaction. Those two. I know when I was a new player, those two tripped me up a lot, so I hope that's helpful. Next up, we have technique, or tech for short. It's your ability to manipulate tools and instruments. So if you're a musician, artist, or inventor, you're going to need a good technique skill. It's also used for first aid, because again, you're using a lot of tools, even if they're like bandages or tourniquet, stuff like that. Paramedic, any type of tool or cybernetic repair, or picking locks or pockets, that's all going to fall under technique.
So remember, chat, if you're good at the violin, you're really good at picking pockets.
You probably got a decent chance, yeah.
See, I'm learning. See, we're good.
Exactly,
we're getting it.
Your parent stat is still good. Now, how many skill levels how many levels you put in the skill for those things could vary. But if you got a good base stat, yeah. Don't trust musicians is what we're saying, because they could probably pick your pockets.
As a musician, I wholeheartedly agree.
Next up is cool, and cool is used to impress and influence others. It's also your ability to blend in and act and look the part of wherever you're at. So skills like persuasion, trading, streetwise, all of that uses the cool skill. It depends. Patient. I'm trying to think. I was watching a show recently and I had a really good example of, someone sticking out like a sore thumb because they are not properly dressed for the occasion that they're attending. Versus like when you can like look, not just like look, because style does matter in this game. But you can also talk like them and act the part and pretend. That's all gonna come from your cool. Will is your determination, courage, and ability to continue on even the harshest conditions. And not only does it only affects a very limited number of skills, but is one of the 2 stats that is used to determine your character's health points. So don't neglect it. Empathy is the last one that I would say links to skills, and it's your ability to relate and care for others. Conversation, not persuasion, not where you're pulling out things from your butt and trying to get them to agree with you, but conversation where you're trying to connect with them, that's an empathy skill. Human perception, so otherwise, insight if you're from D&D, being able to read another person because you know those kind of reactions, that is an empathy-based skill. Empathy is also the stat linked to humanity, and the more humanity you have, the more cyberware you can have. So if you want your character to be kitted out in a lot of metal, make sure you boost your empathy up. Because essentially, what you're doing whenever you take a piece of yourself away and replace it with cybernetics, right? You're essentially saying, this is better than being human. This metal is better than being human. And the more you take away from yourself, the more machine-like you come, and the harder it is for you to relate to humans, so your empathy drops. At least that's how I see it.
It's a very, very good way to analogize that too. Very clear way to do it.
I'm glad. Movement is the next step. So these stats don't really deal with skills so much. Movement doesn't affect your skill. It is simply your speed of movement when running, swimming, climbing, etc. If you're going to move across a map in combat, this is the stat you're going to look at. For every number in that stat is how many squares you can move. So if you have a 5 in movement, you can move 5 squares on your turn. If you have a 2, you can only move 2 squares. Body is next. It's your just natural strength. It doesn't affect absolutely any skill, but is the main stat of the two that determines your health points. So it's going to be body plus will. It is also, very important, the stat that you use when making death saves, which we will talk about in depth later, but the higher your body stat is, the better chance, in theory, you have of staying alive. And finally, the 10th stat is luck, and it has its own special, unique mechanic that you can use in a variety of different ways. Essentially, that luck stat is the total pool of luck points that you have each session, and you can withdraw points from that pool up to the maximum to affect rolls. And then it refills at the top of each session. So it affects your rolls, it can push things into your favor, but as a whole, it doesn't affect your skills.
Oh, that's actually very interesting, coming from the main background of the fantasy game. The halfling race actually has that as a built-in feature, so seeing that as an actual trait is interesting.
Yeah. You all have it. So, and again, you're at minimum, because character creation you can't put lower than 2 points. Minimum, you have 2 points to influence maybe a roll here or there. Next will be skills. Before I go on to skills, is there any question you have about the 10 stats?
With your when it comes down to your empathy versus that of, you mentioned the human perception. I know that's going to be that of a skill-based thing you said.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting how you compared it to the intelligence earlier, also saying the intelligence was based with your perception as well.
So perception and human perception are 2 very different things.
They are in this? Okay.
Yeah, so perception is your
Okay.
awareness of your surroundings. So if someone is hiding and waiting to ambush you, your perception is your ability to spot them. Human perception is your insight, so that is used if you're trying to tell if someone is lying to you.
Got it. Okay.
So one's awareness,
And-
one is person specific.
Got it. Okay. And then more precise on the 2 stats that have to do with your health
Yes,
for your which was the will and the body.
correct.
The one that you said has to do with your death saves, basically.
Body.
Being body. Will has nothing to do with the death saves, does it?
Correct. It does not.
Okay. Okay. I believe that's all I have on that then
Okay.
at the moment.
Cool. That's awesome.
All right.
So for skills, every skill is tied to a specific stat, which I mentioned before. Using will, for example, the skill endurance or resist torture drugs, which is exactly what it sounds like, To resist the effect of a drug, it's going to be the levels that you have put in that skill plus the will stat to get your total for what you would roll. So every skill has a parent stat that it is linked to. Some require more training in order to get a point, but essentially they all work. The higher your skill level, the better trained you are in that skill. Skills cannot go higher than 10. You cannot have more than 10 levels in a skill. That is where it caps out. You've received as much training as you're gonna get. Now, Cyberpunk RED can be really overwhelming because there are over 50 base skills. That's 50 skills your character can learn, and more that you can add to the list. So every time your character learns a new language, that's its own skill. If they want to learn a new science, science is not grouped as one. If you're going to learn biology and then you want to learn chemistry, that's 2 separate skills. If you want to be able to play the violin and the guitar and sing, those are 3 separate skills. So they would all have their own level that you would put into those skills. Now, Easy Mode does a great job on pages 12 to 14. They list the base skills and give a sentence or two describing what each of them does. So I highly recommend you guys, if you're looking at skills, go through that list. It's a nice brief description compared to the core rulebook, which has like a paragraph and explains, if you have a base, this is essentially where you're at, which is great. But Easy Mode, 1 or 2 sentences, it'll tell you exactly what that is. And then as a GM, it's also helpful to just kind of reference them, maybe like what skills best associated with what task if things are a little muddy. I would recommend, if you are playing a new character and you're building skills from the start, always choose some sort of weapon skill, because it is the dark future. You will get in combat at some point. Pick a weapon skill and put points into that. Definitely. And then whatever your character feels like they'd be good at. Before I move on to skill resolution, do you have any questions about skills in general?
Sure. When it comes to, like you said, 5 to 6 kind of being like your more of a base level of being adequate at something.
Yes.
Is that just more or less being the trait itself? Or is that, say, if you have a reflex of 3, but let's just say skill in a weapon that's only a 2, and they both together are a 5, that means you're fairly decent? Or does it mean if you have a 5 in reflex and a 5 in the weapon skill, that means you're fairly decent?
5 is okay. So 5. That's a great question. So the lowest difficulty, not in Easy Mode but in the core rulebook, is 9. So if you have a 3 in reflex and you have 2 points and you're a 5, you have to roll a 5 or better to get through a simple task.
Okay.
So 3 at that point, 3 for your stat is below average. But by putting those 2 points into it, you kind of bump yourself up to being like, I can at least accomplish. I should be at least able to accomplish this skill.
Okay.
Now, mind you, if you had 8 in reflex, and only 2 points, and then your total is 10, like you're already succeeding that 9 difficulty. So on a base level, it's no problem for you.
Right. Okay.
As a rule, mostly because I suck at rolling, I try to have the skills that my character knows to be at least at a base level of 10. Because she sucks at tech, her technique skill is not good. Those ones always fall short. But I can generally, so my tech is a 4. I think I have 2 points in first aid. which makes me a 6. So generally, as long as I can roll 4 or better, I can at least put a band-aid on a wound and stop it from bleeding horribly. I've rolled 1s on my first aid, so it's not always the case. But...
Which means you forgot to take the sealant off the band-aid and it fell off.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
Pretty much. So... natural ability, essentially anytime you put, if you get to a 5, you're as average as anyone you're going to run on the street that isn't geared for whatever it is you're doing. But I would say a total of 10, combining the stat and the skill, is probably where you like to be for average at that point, versus like other edge runners.
Okay.
Anything else about skills before we move on to skill resolution? Great question, by the way.
Well, thank you. Since this is basically on the premise of, let's just say with creating a character, how many skills is it that you start with?
So that's a wonderful question. There are 3 methods of creating a character. In easy mode, there are pre-generated characters for you. They just let you kind of fill in the life path and the background details, and otherwise it's been decided. When you're creating it with the core rulebook, there's 3 different methods. The first 2 will just assign the skills to you, and then you just put however many points that they give you, I can't remember how many it is, into those set skills. If you do the complete character package, which is what I choose to do, because then you have ultimate freedom over what you can do, I believe there are at least, I want to say, without opening my notes, 12 skills that you have to put at least 2 points in.
Okay.
That's not right. 8 maybe? So you start with 86 points. And it drops down to 60. So what is that if it's 2 points per?
30.
23, what?
If you do 60 divided by 2, it's 30.
86 minus 60 is 26. But if there's 2 points in each, that's 13, right?
Yes.
There we go. I mathed. So there's 13 skills that require you to have a minimum of 2 points in. So first aid is one of them. Everybody has a general understanding of first aid. It has been taught to you. First aid is there. Brawling is another one. You know how to throw a punch. Even if you've never been in a fight, you have seen it. You roughly understand how to punch someone. Athletics is another, like, you have to have this. Not streetwise. Local expert of your community, your area where you live. You have a general knowledge of that. Otherwise, you have 60 points to choose from any of the 50 plus skills to your heart's content.
Okay.
Or you can beef up those levels of the ones that you already have. So, I would say, again, I would choose weapons first. And then the less skills you choose, the more points you put in, the more specialized you are. But that you're not limited to that. If you want to take a whole bunch of skills and put 1 point in each and be like a generalist, you can do that.
Right. So you're not limited to it. So you could be the generalist. You could be a jack of all trades. You could be a honed in specialist.
Yep.
It's more or less to your own cup of tea, how you want to do things. Just make sure you take some sort of weapon so you do not get splattered against a wall in an alleyway somewhere.
Yes. Or martial arts. Martial arts is also viable.
Cyber Kung Fu is a thing.
Cyber Kung Fu is a thing. 100% a thing. Also, at character creation, I should say you cannot put more than 6 points in a skill. because you cap out at 10, so it's like 6 levels. You cap out at 10 in any skill. You cannot go over 6 at character creation. There has to be room for you to grow in a skill at some point.
Fair enough.
But if you want to pick only 10 skills and put them all at 6, yeah, you absolutely could.
Okay.
So now that we've got stats, we know our skills, we know what we're choosing, let's talk about skill resolution. So while you're playing your tabletop game in this wonderful imaginary world that we have of the dark future, and your character tries to do something that has a chance to fail, walking down the street, you're fine. Your GM is likely not going to ask you to roll anything. But if you try to do something, if you try to walk down the street stealthily, and you could fail, your GM is going to ask you for a roll. That roll is going to be a skill check. There's 2 ways to resolve this. It's either person versus person, or person versus difficulty value, or DV for short. Person versus person skill checks come into play when 2 living things are at some form of odds. So in that example, you are stealthing, it's going to be versus the opponent or whoever you're trying to stealth from, generally, their perception roll. Or it could be a persuasion versus a human insight. If I'm trying to persuade you of a thing versus your ability to tell that I am lying through my teeth, or maybe that I'm holding something back, it's going to be person versus person. And to complete that, you're going to take your skill base plus your dice roll. So your skill base is your stat, plus whatever levels you have put into that specific skill, and that makes up your skill base. So as we spoke before, when you were saying if you had a reflex 3 and put 2 points into that specific skill, 5 is your skill base. So you add 5 to your D10 roll. It's always going to be a D10 for a skill check. And whatever that total is, that is your roll for that for that skill check.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I feel like I spoke a lot of
does.
words. Okay.
You did. You laid it out fairly straightforward though, because it makes sense. Basically, if you are doing a generalized action that is basically a natural action, then things should play out naturally.
Yes.
But if you do something that requires a reaction, then you will have to roll for it. And in doing so, then it will take that of your trait plus that of your skill that coexist together, added together, to then be applied with your D10 roll plus against whatever the difficulty is.
Against the other person. Because they do the same.
Against the other person. Got it.
Right? Because if it's person versus person, they do the exact same thing.
Right.
Whatever number is higher wins.
Yes.
So in Cyberpunk RED, very important, you have to beat the other person. Or the difficulty value.
Okay.
So if it is person versus a difficulty value, like you said, if it's not another person, if it's an actual skill check while you're trying to do, let's say, drive a car, right? Driving a car is not versus anybody else. It's just, do you have the ability to drive the car or make a sharp turn in the situation? So that's versus a difficulty value. So the GM will determine what difficulty that is. There's a handy dandy table for GMs there. And based on that, they'll set it to whatever it is. And then it's what you said before. It's your dice roll plus your skill base. And you have to beat that value. If you tie, you fail. And in person, it might be easier to remember that, like, in a person versus person, ties go to the defender. Person versus a table, ties go to the defender. The defender is the table at that point. You have to beat it.
Okay. Right.
In all instances, must, for skill checks, must succeed.
Right, so with that, there is no gray area.
Correct. And I want to say I read something by James Hutt, who did all the balancing of mechanics. And some people ask, they're like, why isn't it meat wins? And he's like, because I didn't want it to be bogged down by having to look up what does a tie do. If you beat it, you succeed. So that's all you need to remember. Otherwise, you fail. And it made it very cut and dry and helps keep pacing moving a lot faster. And that's why. Fun little fact.
Also kind of fits the theme too, doesn't it? I mean, it is more of a dark, gritty future kind of thing. So you either win or you don't.
Or you don't, yeah.
It's all or nothing.
Exactly. That's a really good point. So yeah, that's essentially your basic skill resolution. If it's person versus person, you both roll a dice, highest number wins. If it's you versus the difficulty value, you roll your dice, add your skill base, beat the number, you win.
So, aside from the basics of applying your skill plus your trait, is there, since, again, coming from the fantasy background of things,
Yep.
Is there things that other ways to apply bonuses per se to your stats?
Yes. So that's my next segment, which is great. So they've called it Skill Resolution Plus.
Ooh.
So now that we know the basics of skill resolution, what other things can we do to affect it? First, critical successes. You can still have critical successes and critical failures in Cyberpunk RED. Critical success occurs when you roll a natural 10 on your 10-sided dice. When that happens, you roll the d10 a second time, and whatever number that is, you add it to your 10. And that becomes your dice roll. So before we mentioned having a skill base of 5, if you roll a 10 and then a 5, you get to add 15 to that 5, which is going to put you at a 20, which will probably succeed most any DV or player versus player skill check you are attempting. If you roll 2 10s in a roll, it does not keep going. It only gets to happen once. But at that point, you have a 20 on your dice roll, plus your skill base, probably going to succeed.
In that moment, you're Cyber God.
Yes. Pretty much.
Firmware cannot handle you.
Unfortunately, there's also critical failures, which work very similar. If you roll a natural 1 on your d10, you critically fail. If you roll 2 1s, you don't keep rolling. It only happens once, right? You only re-roll one time. Critical failures, though, are a little tricky. So if you roll a 1, the 1 gets added to your skill check. The second number is then subtracted from the total. So if you're making, say, a drive land vehicle check, and your skill base is a 10, because your reflex is a 6, your skill level is a 4, right? So your base is 10, you roll a 1, followed by a 6. The 1 is added to your skill base for a total of 11. Then you would subtract the 6 for a total skill check of 5. 5 becomes your roll. For me, that's really confusing and too much math. So when I roll a 1, I just subtract it from the next number and then subtract that. So if I have a base 10 and I roll a 6, I just kind of go, I'm minus 5. And that's easier for me. Because instead of adding the 1 and then subtracting 6, I just take the 1, like I just make the penalty 1 less than the dice roll. You looked really confused.
Yeah, no, that is very... That's very convoluted. Wow.
Because the 1 still counts as an additive, right? That's why it's a little finicky. And then you subtract the second number. For me, it's easier just to imagine that the second number is 1 less than it is.
Right.
It's just easier on my brain.
Okay. So if your added bonus is a 4 and you roll a 1,
Mm-hmm.
you would still start at a 10 and then
Wait,
add the 1.
Wait, where did the 10 come from?
Where did you start at 11?
So, my reflex is a 6. So if I'm doing drive land vehicle, my skill base is 10.
Right.
Because my reflex is 6, and I've put 4 points into the skill drive land vehicle.
Oh, okay. There we go.
So that's totals
That's
10.
why I'm confused.
There you go.
That's
Sorry.
where I was lost at. Okay. So, in theory, doing so, if you rolled a 1, you could still technically, your roll could go into a negative.
Oh, yeah.
And at that point, you were just tossed 3 ways to the wind. You're just done.
It depends on how nice or mean your GM is feeling. I have crit success, like, I've rolled double 10s, gotten over the topmost threshold, and it's just like, you succeed really, really well. Because there's nothing really that happened more than that. I have negatively failed, and I think totaled a car, or scraped an entire side as I tried to back out a very narrow thing and scraped the dumpster along one side of the car. I had a player make this beautifully elegant speech, and then they rolled, and it was 1 followed by, I think, a 10, which is the worst you can do, right? Because at that point, you're either -10, you're -10 for it, or as I do it, -9, right? You just don't add that 1. And it ended up in the negatives, and I was like, it's a beautiful speech that was all in your head, and you didn't utter a single word out loud. Negatives are hard. Low numbers are slightly better, but yeah, when it's a negative roll, it's that you crit failed.
I mean, listen, sometimes it's just how the dice roll.
Yep.
And unfortunately, it's how it goes. Whether it's in the fantasy game or whether it's in the cyber game, you just got to eat crow sometimes.
Exactly.
And
you have a great moment. You embrace that and you lean into it.
I bet it was a great speach.
It was
And,
fantastic. I'm pretty sure I even gave the player a bonus to their roll because it was so good, and it did not matter. Felt bad, man. Felt bad. So those are your crit successes and critical fails. Like I said, failure is a little more tricky because of how it works, but that's how they do. If you fail, depending on the activity you're attempting to do, you could try again. As long as your chance of success have improved for some reason. So, if you're going to take longer, if you're using a better tool or a tool instead of, natural skill, if you or a friend makes a complementary skill check, if you use luck from that wonderful luck pool we have, that all changes your chances of success to be better, and therefore you could try again. Now, in the example of I'm going to do a sharp U-turn and, try to or drift this corner, I get one chance. You don't get a second chance from that. That is your attempt to do that maneuver. You cannot try again. But if I say I try to pick a lock and it doesn't work, but I don't critically fail, I didn't damage the lock in any way, then if I change my chances of success, I can try again. So, and that's not just, these are other ways that you can improve, like get bonuses to your roll ahead of time if you wanted to. So complementary skill check occurs when the use of one skill directly affects the use of another. That's at the GM's discretion, and the nature of the skill check must make sense. If you're a GM and you're ever not sure, education is generally a good basic, because every education is one of those ones everybody needs to have. So if they make a high enough education roll, you could say, yeah, you get a +1 for this, as long as it's related. They do not stack. Complementary skill checks don't stack, so you can't make a bunch of complementary skill checks and get like a +8. But you can get a +1 to your skill check. Or if a friend is helping you do something, they can make the check and assist and give you a +1.
So, since there is a mechanic called try again,
Yes.
just as an example, with the speech critical failure, if the GM stated, like you said, that it's a great, wonderful speech, it was amazing, you did it all in your head. Okay. Well, I did it all in my head. I'd like to use luck and say that I rehearsed that in my head and use luck to now say it verbatim out loud. And I would like to try again.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would allow it.
Just make sure I want. And I assume that would still be, at GM's discretion if they would allow that. Or is that, but just walking myself through it.
Yeah.
Basically.
For flavor, I might be the person you're talking to looks a little concerned because you've been staring at them silently for 2 minutes. But yeah, you could try again.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, raindrop on my exposed computer chip. Sorry.
But yes, that would be a perfect example of trying again, because you used luck to change the chances of your success. Specifically, another way, and we'll get to, let's talk about using luck, because you just did it, and that was fantastic. So you have that luck pool that you can use as much as you would like up to that maximum throughout an entire session. So if you have a luck pool of 5 and you wanted to try that, that speech again, you could use all 5. You could just use 1, because as long as you have +1, it changes your chance of success. And maybe your persuasion or your conversation is really high, you just crit failed, or it's decent and you just crit failed and it sucked. So you could spend anywhere between 1 and 5. Anything you don't spend stays there to be used throughout the rest of the session. So you'll always have that max number to pull from throughout the course of one session, and then it refills at the beginning. Now you can only use it once, so on the off chance that you make your speech, it's in your head, you failed miserably, you try again, you roll a 2, and it's not enough to impress because they were talking to the queen of the city at the time. And that, like a 12 is not enough to really impress them, but they're polite enough anyway. You can't use more luck to try again because you've already used something to try again.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the try again is only repeatable on that singular action once.
Depends. It depends. Per the rules as written, I believe it is that the way you're trying to try again, you can only do once. But if you use luck, and in this case talking to a person, at that point, if you try to take extra time, there really isn't extra time you can take to do the speech. A complimentary skill check at that point by someone trying to help you out to refumble, I'm going to say is going to be really hard for you to do.
Right.
But if you're picking a lock and, you can't quite beat that difficulty, and so then you get a friend to kind of like help you shine a flashlight, let's say, right, on the lock so you have a better light source for what you're doing. That includes a tool, so it's complimentary skill check +1, that would count. Say you still fail it, because that sometimes you just roll like shit. I've been there. You can't use a complimentary skill check again. You could, in theory, take more time if the GM's really sweet and you don't have any pressure coming down on you. If you fail again, you could technically use luck, because you've used different mechanics to get those +1s. Or you could do it all at the start before you roll and just hope for the best. But it really depends on, like, you only use that one type, whether it's taking extra time, using luck, or complementary skill check, once.
And typically, the trying again is, it's definitely one of those things. It's if you can, if the player can come up with a valid reason for a skill check, typically, then it can possibly come out for a try again, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like, say, oh, why would you need to take extra time? Well, I can go distract the guard a little bit longer by using my synth hurdy-gurdy.
I'm gonna make a performance to distract them for an extra 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
At which point, your GM's gonna ask you for a performance skill check or a hurdy-gurdy play instrument check, and as long as you can beat that skill check, you'll get the +1.
You ever thought of a synth hurdy-gurdy yet, have you?
No, I haven't. I thought of a theremin, like a
mm-hmm.
advanced theremin, but not a hurdy-gurdy. And I do love me a good hurdy-gurdy, so.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Hmm.
I will be honest, if I am your GM and your musical instrument is a hurdy-gurdy, that will just inherently endear you to me, and you will probably get bonuses anyway.
It's no longer synthwave, it's just pirate wave.
Yes, perfect. The last thing about skill checks that I want to mention, so those are how you can get bonuses. Did that answer all the questions? They all make sense?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe we've basically walked through scenarios with each one of the bonuses. So I believe we're as far as situationals, we've covered it all.
Cool. So the last thing I want to mention is what happens when you have 0 levels in a skill and your GM asks you for that skill check, or you want to try something even though you have no points in that skill. Like, I want to pick a pocket. I am a musician, but I have absolutely no points in pickpocket. Can I do it? Yes, of course you can. So the check is the same. You're still going to take your skill base, which is your stat plus your skill level. Your skill level is just a 0. Mm-hmm. So at that point, you're just going to roll your d10 and add your stat and hope for the best.
Okay, so at that point, it would basically be 5 plus 0 plus whatever your d10 is.
Yep.
Just for example.
Yep.
Okay.
And for me personally, this is why I always prefer to use like the full character sheet than just listing the skills that I have, because I did that once and I was constantly asking the GM what the parent stat was that I added, because I did not have those skills. So I just, on the big full character sheet, it will tell you the skill and it will always put in brackets next to it what the parent stat is. So even if you don't have points, you know what you're rolling or what you're adding to your roll.
Mm-hmm.
And that's skill resolution. That's stats, skills, and skill resolutions. Cyberpunk RED is a tale of the dark future, and at some point, you're going to end up in combat. More than likely. So let's talk about how combat works. It's broken into rounds where every participant takes 1 turn per round. A round is 3 seconds long. So super quick, super fast. Before we get into what you can do on your turn, we're going to start with, like most combat, I think in most TTRPGs, you start with initiative. Figuring out who goes first in that round. So it's determined by rolling a d10, and adding your reflex stat, because as we said before, your reflex is your reaction time. All initiative members are put into a queue then of descending order, so the higher your reflexes are, chances are you're going to be one of the first to go. Any question that's initiative, then you're put in a queue, and then you go in order throughout the round till everyone gets one turn, and then goes back to the top. I feel like that's pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So on your turn, a participant gets one action and one move action. A move action allows you to move across the map. You can move as many squares equal to your move stat and break this up on your turn as much as you want without going over. So if you want to move and then punch someone and move and punch someone else and then move, you can do that. You don't have to move at all. You can forego your move action if you would like, but you get one action and one move action. So let's talk about the various actions you can do other than running around the field. Attack is your most basic. It is an attack action, and this allows you to make a melee or a ranged attack. Some melee or ranged attacks will have a rate of fire of 2, allowing the participant to shoot, stab, punch, etc. twice during their attack action, where others will only have a rate of fire of 1. Regardless of the rate of fire, and that counts for melee, even though it says fire in it, I'm aware, counts for melee or brawling too. Regardless of what the rate of fire is, the action being taken that turn is the attack action. So far, so good?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I know you caught my slight twitch when it said the difference there. We're good. We're fine.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Another action is get up. Get up is the action you take after being knocked prone. While you are prone until you use this action, you cannot use your move action. You are stuck in place until you use this action to get up. Now you could, in theory, still attack from prone. Your GM might impose a penalty on you. But you cannot move from your spot if you are prone until you use this action. Next are my Sorry, go ahead.
By penalty, what do you mean by that?
That's a wonderful question. So there are penalties that your GM could impose upon your crew, ranging from like a -1 to a -4, depending on the situation. So if you're trying to, let's say, make a perception check on which is your awareness, right? See what's out there.
Mm-hmm.
During a really foggy night or a smog-covered night, because it's Night City and it's the dark future and smog exists, and you don't have any sort of cybernetic eye enhancement or binoculars or anything that's going to help you see through this fog, the GM could impose, like, say, a -2 penalty. So when you roll your skill base plus your dice roll, whatever that total is, you will then subtract 2, no matter what.
Okay.
So if you are knocked prone and you're trying to use an assault rifle to shoot someone, I'm going to say from prone, perhaps, it's very difficult to get the gun in the right position to shoot, so you're going to be firing at a -2.
Okay.
Cool. I think there's a list of penalties in easy mode. If not, it's on the GM screen in the core rulebook. Alright, so the next 3 are kind of my favorite not to use them because people get confused with them a lot. So, there is the grab action, which allows you to grab and hold an opponent. You could call it grapple if you want, grab. Or, because you can also take away an object your opponent is holding. So you can grab an object, you can grab the person. Grab is the action. You are only allowed 1 action on your turn. Choke and throw are different actions. You cannot, therefore, grab and choke someone or grab and throw someone in the same turn. You have to grab them first, hope they don't break away from you, and then you can do one or the other. So choke allows you to choke an opponent you have grabbed. When you choke someone, you deal your body stat in damage directly to their HP regardless of their armor. So if you have a really high body stat, or if you're up against someone who has a really high body stat and they hold you and they start choking you, it's going to go straight to your health points, and you could drop real fast. The throw action allows you to throw a grabbed opponent onto the ground, thus making them prone. Now, in between these actions, right, the attack, I think one of the attack actions that I didn't mention earlier would be, like, say, a brawling action to get out of that grab. So, your opponent goes, they grab you, say successfully, then you have a chance to break away. Or if you're the one doing the grabbing, your opponent on their turn will have that chance to break away. If they break away, you are no longer grabbing them, which means you cannot choke, you cannot throw. So if you're going to hold on to someone, better hope, like if you're going to grab to choke, better hope you can hold on to them.
So,
yes,
because it doesn't explicitly say here, that at least not that I see, when it comes to the throwing action, does any of your skills specifically, or at least, or maybe this skill doesn't work, or not skill, excuse me, the action, maybe it doesn't work the way I'm thinking it does. Does the ability of throw not have a distance tied to it? Like, if I were to grab someone and, like, try to throw them, say, 10 feet off the side of a building.
As I believe, and I could be wrong, I'm going to have to double check this because I don't do this a lot because my character is not strong. I believe throw is to the ground specifically as a regular action. Because, if memory serves, there is a martial arts discipline you can take. So if you put enough points into martial arts every 2-3 levels, I think you gain a new martial art move. And one of those moves will let you throw a distance. So I believe the general throw rule is just to the ground. However, if you have that martial art, you could absolutely 100% yeet them off a building.
Okay.
Pending your success.
Again,
of
just
the roll,
just wanted to clarify on that. Again, coming from that of like the fantasy background of tabletop, that is a generalization for throwing versus this speculation. So I just wanted to see what the difference was.
I believe there's a martial arts ability if you have that skill.
Gotcha.
To do real cool things. Otherwise, anyone can just toss a person to the ground. But you can just toss a person to the ground. Nothing special. Another action is the reload action. So if you have to reload your weapon, that will take your action. Run allows an additional move action, but only if you have already taken the move action that turn. Which means, if you use the get up action from prone, because you can't use your move action until you get up, you can't run. You only have that movement. Well, I guess you've already used your action with the get up action. So yeah, you have to move in order to then run. The stabilize is another action, which you can use on another participant in the battle, to either allow the healing process to begin, which will happen after combat, or pull them out of the mortally wound state and save their life. Very important. How difficult it is to stabilize someone depends on their wound state, which is on page 20, so I'm not going to go over those numbers, because that'll just be random numbers that I'm throwing at you, which doesn't mean anything. But save a life, stabilize. You can also use, there's an action to use a skill. So if there's something that you want to accomplish with a skill check, you could use a skill. It's possible, depending on what you're trying to do, the GM may say, yes, you can do this. It's going to require this skill check with this DV, and it will take you 3 rounds. And then it's up to you whether or not you want to do it. There's also a use an object. If that object does not require a skill check, that is a different action. And just as a note, and it's written in there, drawing an easily accessible weapon into a free hand or dropping a held weapon does not use up an action. Stowing a held weapon on your person does. Because you want to make sure you put it away, put it in the right holster, whatever you're doing, so that's going to take up a whole action that's going to take your concentration to do. But just drawing it, not a problem. Or dropping it to the ground. Finally, you can hold your action. Hold action is an action. If you want to do something, but you want to do it when something specific happens, or a specific moment in the initiative order, you use your hold action. You do need to state what the action is, what's going to trigger it, and the intended target. So if you're like, when that person moves out of cover, I want to shoot them, and I'm going to hold my attack action to shoot them once they move out of cover. And those are all the action types. And easy mode has a real nice list. It's in a nice table and a chart. So if you're like, what one action can I do? You can go through the list and be like, this one. These are separate. Like it's nicely laid out. Any questions?
Again, so the grab has the 2 follow-ups, which is either the choke or the throw. Correct. And those can only be done basically on your next turn.
So long as you're still holding the opponent, yes.
Okay. So could you, in theory, do, like, if you... Could you use hold action and say when they... Like, if you use your movement...
Right.
And then, let's just say, for a visualization, let's say you're in an alleyway.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
And the combat's happening, and that, you know, walls on either side. So it's a pretty straightforward way. Could you hold your action to, after you made your own movement, to say, okay, I want to hold my action to where when they come towards me, I want to try to grab them when they get close?
Yes.
Okay. And then at that point, they would have to basically use their action to try and break free, or
continue doing whatever they were going to do.
Okay. The only reason I was asking that was trying to basically think of ways for the player in questions to still have easier ways of getting to be able to use those abilities of, you know, throw or choke, because that does seem, like you said, kind of hard to get to those points without.
It depends. I have seen other players who have maxed out their body stat to an 8. So grab uses the brawling skill, which is one of those default skills you have to have. So minimum you have to have 2 points in it. Their body stat is an 8. At base, they're at a 10. Then they decide to max out those 6 skill points that they can and put 6 points in that. And so their base brawling is a 16 plus dice roll, which is pretty difficult to beat.
Yeah, the Terminator.
Pretty much, yeah. So for them, holding on to opponent, not so hard. If you're really concerned about it, or you're trying to find a way where you're like, okay, but I'm not that strong and I'd rather just kind of go boom boom, I would say theoretically, it may be considered a little cheesy, but in theory, you could say, I would like to hold my action, like say you're in melee combat with a specific combatant, you know they're going to hit you next, right? Like that's where you're at. I'm going to hold my action till after they attack me to grapple them. So that way when it comes your turn on the initiative, right, because it was your turn, you're holding your action, they attack you, which uses up their action. Then you grab. If you succeed, your next action will go first.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the only way I could see you getting one out of it.
Mm-hmm. And again, like I said, it's just exploring the different pathways for those who are, watching and or listening, because the whole point of going over this is, with it being Cyberpunk RED easy, is to also offer the insight of some easier ways to get to the abilities that they can use.
Yeah, 100%. But I see a lot of people get confused because they believe like grabbing or choking is an attack action. It's not. It's a separate action, which is why it's very important to make that distinction.
Right. I can see how that would be confusing too, because the title of choke does sound like an attack when you hear that.
People assume
it's kind of crazy.
Brawling has a rate of fire too, so they assume it's part of a brawling attack, but it's not. It's its own separate action.
Yeah. Huh.
So any other questions about the actions before we get into combat resolution?
I don't believe so. I think we're pretty good there.
Cool. So for combat action resolution, I suppose. As I stated earlier, attack is likely going to be your most used action in combat. So we're going to start with, how do you resolve an attack? If you use the attack action with a ranged weapon, you're likely going to roll against the ranged combat difficulty value table. Every ranged weapon type has a specific difficulty based on the distance between the attacker and the target. So resolving this is very similar to a person versus the DV skill check that we mentioned before. You take your weapon's skill base, which would be your stat, which will always be reflexes because that's for ranged weapons, plus however many points in that level, that skill you have. So that's your skill base, plus your D10, and you have to beat whatever the difficulty value is of the range you're trying to, the range between you and your opponent. If you succeed in beating that difficulty range, the difficulty value for the range, then you can roll damage. So you have to hit first before you roll damage. And the range, there's a handy dandy chart, and I recommend don't leave it on your DM. It's in the core rulebook. You as a player have access to it. Help your DM out. Have the range table in front of you. You know what your weapon type is. You can see whether or not you hit or miss if you know how far away they are. All that information is there to you. You can make combat go a lot faster. So just as an example, and I know this is going to be a lot of numbers, I just happen to know them because I use pistols, and I've used pistols for the past 3 years with my character. At the first tier of range, which is 0 to 6 meters, because it's 2 meter every square, is DV 13. I have to beat a 13. At 7 to 12, it goes up to a 15. And then gets progressively higher the farther away the target is. Assault rifles are higher kind of on the closer you are, and then there's a sweet middle spot, and then it gets harder again the farther away they are. Sniper rifles, of course, are going to be harder the closer you are, And then easier difficulty value will go down the farther away they are, because that is what they are meant to do. So, you know your range, you know your skill level, you can easily determine whether or not you beat that difficulty based on the range.
Oh, how just just an interesting side note there when mentioning that. You said sniper there, yeah.
Yeah.
That's I don't actually see that on the table in the easy mode.
Is it
combat.
not?
It is not.
Okay, so easy mode, because easy mode, they took the very basics that you need to just understand the system, so they took out certain things that are in the full game. So I guess one of the pre-generated characters did not have a sniper rifle, and therefore that's not a table that was needed.
Mm-hmm.
So they just removed it.
But
If you're playing the
that
full
does go
game,
to show
there is a
that,
sniper rifle table.
yeah, I was about to say, so that does go to show that there are more mechanics and weaponry and items that are included in the full game that are not going to be in easy mode. So if you get a taste for it, then there's more to be involved with in the full game.
There's so much more. I believe the difficulty value table in easy mode 2 only goes from 13 to 24. And 13 is like an everyday task, where in the full game it's 9 to 29. Where 9 is, if you beat 9, it's simple. It's the lowest you can, as long as you beat this, you're good. Before it even gets to everyday, and then it jumps from 24 to 29 as being like beyond incredible. But for the purposes of easy mode, it's just like, these are the ranges you need to play with. But in the full game, you have a little more. You have a lot more. You have a lot more you can do. So that's for ranged attacks. I think that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Skill base plus dice versus chart. Melee combat is similar to person versus person skill checks. So the attacker versus the defender. The attacker is going to use their skill base for, it'll probably be melee weapon. However, it could be brawling, it could be martial arts, depending on what you're doing. Plus your D10, so that's skill base plus D10 versus the defender's skill base plus evasion. Evasion, skill base plus D10. So in most cases, if you're using a melee weapon, like a baseball bat, it's going to be melee weapon plus D10 versus evasion plus D10. Whoever, if the attacker has to beat it. So if it's a tie, the defender dodges. If the attacker wins, you get to hit. And then the specifics of, there you go. The specifics of grabbing, choking, and throwing, probably, are on page 18 of easy mode. So I'm gonna quickly, where is that? 18. Throw. Let's just, because you asked, throw a person you're grappling or an object you are holding. If you're the attacker in a grappling action, throw the item on the ground, dealing your body stat directly to their hit points, and damage. Ignores the armor. Throwing your target, freeing you both, leaves them prone. Yeah, it doesn't say that there's a distance, so you just get to throw them on the ground. Like the Lonely Island song.
It's a very good reference.
Thank you. But for more details, page 18 for grabbing, choking, and throwing. So those are your attack, how attacks get resolved.
This damage ignores the defender's armor and doesn't ablate it.
Yeah, we're going to get to armor in a minute, so I'm not going to answer that just yet.
That is fair. Very fair.
So the next I want to talk about is, so now that you know how to attack, right? There's also cover. Cover can be used to help you, avoid an attack and not get hit by like a bullet. Anything that you can use as cover has hit points, and that cover can be attacked. At 0 hit points, the cover is destroyed. If the hit points drop to 0, any excess damage is lost and doesn't harm the target hiding behind it. But you could absolutely decimate a wall, given enough time and damage to do enough that you can see the person behind it. And this is the thing. There are 3 golden rules, or 3? Yes, 3 golden rules of cover. No, I lied, there's 4. You are considered to be in cover if you are fully behind something that could stop a bullet. The opponent has line of sight on you, you are not in cover. There is no partial cover. It can either stop a bullet or it can't. If it cannot stop a bullet, it provides no cover, and thus the cover has no HP. Page 19 has a wonderful chart on various types of cover and what those hit points would be for that type of material. So if you're in a pool hall and you rage flip a table and you duck behind it and someone moves to the side and they have line of sight on you, no cover. If they put enough holes through it, like say a shotgun shell hole, and that is a hole wide enough where they can see a part of your body, there's no partial cover, they can hit you at that point. Or if they do enough damage that maybe the entire table isn't destroyed, but they have knocked out all the hit points where there's so many holes you're getting hit, it has no cover. It does not count as cover at that point.
So, reading off the golden rules.
Yes.
So you have to be fully behind something that could stop a bullet.
Correct.
If they have line of sight on you, you are not in cover. Okay. There's no partial cover. You can either stop it or it can't. And it has to have HP. If it has no HP, then it can't. So if I grab someone that is slightly taller than me and hold them in front of me and they're still breathing,
human shields are 100% an option as cover.
Fantastic. This is great news.
Yes. You don't have to choke or throw an opponent. You can just hold them and use them as a human shield.
Okay. I had to walk it down. Yep. I had to make sure I was checking everything off.
You got it. You checked it.
We're good. Cool. Good.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I meant to mention it earlier and I completely forgot about it.
don't, I got you. Don't you worry.
Yeah. All right. So now that we have discussed how attacks work, how cover works, let's talk about damage. When the attack succeeds, the attacker rolls damage based on the weapon they use. The defender takes the total damage dealt, subtracts their armor's stopping power, and if any damage remains, that amount affects your hit points. I've got 2 examples for you. So the first, when your armor is enough protection. So let's say Easy swings at me with a baseball bat. And the attack hits, and you roll damage, and it's 10 damage. The armor I'm wearing has a stopping power of 11. Well, 10 minus 11 is -1. You do not get through my armor. I don't take any damage to my hit points. Nothing happens. Really sucks when you have a really difficult attack and you nail the attack and you're like, yes, and then you don't roll enough damage. It hurts. It happens. Not a lot, but it does. But what happens
a plastic baseball bat?
Yeah, right? What happens when your armor isn't enough? Actually, I shouldn't say that. Sorry. Not with a baseball bat. Let's say you shoot me with a gun. Has to be a bullet for this to work. 10 damage. No, because melee weapons do different things. Baseball bat's incoming.
Crowbar.
Crowbar's incoming, but for now, ranged weapon. Bullet, arrow, doesn't matter. Only does 10 damage, doesn't get through my armor. But what happens when the armor isn't enough? So let's say you shoot me, because again, ranged. I forgot. Has to be ranged. And you deal 20 damage. I'm wearing stopping power of 11. 20 minus 11 is 9. I take 9 damage directly to my hit points. And my armor is ablated by 1. Which means, whenever damage goes through, the integrity of the stopping power of your armor is reduced by 1. Until the armor is repaired. Because you've poked a hole through it, it is no longer as sturdy as it was. So the next time an attack hits me, my stopping power is down to 10.
Oh, okay.
So the
That
lower my
I got
armor,
it.
the more damage goes through, and each subsequent time, the lower my armor is going to get.
Got it. Yep. So every time that threshold is reached and passed, your resistance is lowered each time.
Correct.
Got it.
So, with range combat, this is why it's important. Ranged combat works exactly like that. Melee combat is different. Brawling has its own specific properties, but if you were using a melee weapon or martial arts, you ignore half of the armor stopping power when you deal damage. So what this means, using our first example, where we're going to go back to, we'll change it to a crowbar, but you only dealt 10 damage, right? My armor has a stopping power of 11. However, because you're using a melee weapon, you ignore half of my armor, rounding up. So my armor is considered to be 6 instead of 11. Well, guess what? 10 minus 6 is 4. So I take 4 damage, and my armor goes down by 1. Because melee weapons and martial arts ignore half armor. Now, my total stopping power, so you hit me with a crowbar, it really hurts. For you, it's considered only a 6, right? My stopping power goes down by 1, but my base was 11. It's still 10. So if someone else shoots me, they have to get through 10. But you only have to get through 5 if you're going to use a melee weapon.
Okay. Right.
So you treat the armor against a melee attack as though it was only half effective.
Right. And the melee will still ablate it.
Yes. As long as damage goes through.
Which only has to be half. Okay.
Yep. Now, the exception is brawling, which is like your fists. Unless you have some cyberware that states otherwise, brawling does not ignore half armor. You have to get through the full armor like a bullet would. Martial arts, because it's a specifically trained skill on how to fight and do damage to the body, martial arts ignores half armor. But if you're just going to get in a fist fight, no. That's all I got for damage.
Pretty apt. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, now that I understand what the ablated, basically, that system is, I got it. I think we're good.
Yeah. So the more damage you take, the more your armor gets wrecked, the less effective it is.
And the more damage you take.
And the more damage you take. Yes. So, if for your earlier question of a grapple, when you grapple, both people in the grapple are at a -2 penalty to any other checks that they make, because you are focused on either holding the person or trying to get out from being the held person, right? So you're constantly in this tug of war. Anything else you try to do is at a -2. But because you were grappling them, whether you choke them, I think was what you were looking at, it does not ablate their armor because you're dealing it directly to their HP, right? You're cutting off their windpipe. Their armor isn't affected by that, so their armor is not ablated.
And just because we're on the topic of armors, just as a quick passing note, do certain armors, since we're going by it, have any effects on movement penalties by chance? Like any weights or anything?
Yep. I don't know if it does in easy mode. That's what I'm actually quickly looking up, because I think in easy mode they did it very simply where you didn't have to worry about penalties, because that's one extra thing to worry about when you're learning the system. So probably not in this kit. In the full game, yes, the heavier the armor you wear, you take penalties to your reflexes, your reaction time, right, and your hand-eye coordination, your dexterity stat. So any skills, by the way, associated with reflexes and dexterity also take that penalty, and your movement.
Okay.
And it ranges from, I think, a -2 2 penalty to a -4 in the core book.
Okay.
But I mean, the heaviest armor is like stopping power 18. So someone has to roll really high or hit you with something massive to get through that.
Okay. So that was my next question was what were the armor values kind of like? What did they go up to? And the next thing to follow up from that is with taking damage, upon like, is there like a damage threshold before you start?
Yes.
But like, for example, like if you were to take a certain amount of damage, do you start getting any stat lowerings from the damage you take?
You do. And we're going to talk about that in wound states and death saves. But before I get there, I want to talk about critical injuries. So, because critical injuries tie into the damage that you deal. If at any point the attack is made when they roll, so it's d6s for damage dice. If you ever roll 2d6s in a single attack pool, you cause a critical injury. Now, there is a handy dandy table in easy mode of a list of critical injuries that is half the size of the one in the core rulebook. And in addition to causing a critical injury, which has its own effect to the person, it also deals 5 damage directly to their hit points. So even if, we'll say, and this is important. Oh, actually, let me read my thing to make sure I don't miss anything. The critical injury table is found on page 20 of easy mode. No, I'm good. So even if the damage of the attack does not beat the defender's armor, but you still rolled that critical injury and those 5 points of damage still go through. However, the armor wouldn't weaken, but you still deal the injury, you still deal those 5 points of damage. Assuming you survive combat, you keep the critical injury, or multiple of them, until they are healed. This can be done one of 2 ways, either a quick fix or treatment. The chart will tell you what methods are available. Some cannot be quick fixed, some require treatment only, and then what that difficulty value is for the skill that's necessary to treat it. Some require surgery, which is only available to medtechs. A quick fix takes a minute. You can do it to yourself, but it only removes the critical injury effects for the rest of the day. And they come right back. Treatment removes the effects permanently, but you cannot treat yourself, and each treatment takes 4 hours. So, for example, there is a torn muscle critical injury. So if you deal a torn muscle, or if you receive it, you are at a -2 to any melee attack. Now, you could quick fix it however you would like to flavor that. I can't remember what the DV is. And you won't have that penalty for the rest of the day. But then the next day it's just going to come back until you get that muscle treated. Or until you get that critical injury, rather, treated. You can have multiple critical injuries. And it sucks.
Oh no.
Real bad. Any questions from you about critical injuries?
Well, you just answered the one that I had, which was, could you have more than one? And I'm assuming that stacks on top of death saves.
It depends. There are some critical injuries that affect your death save. Some, like the torn muscle, which is only a -2 penalty to melee attacks, doesn't affect your death save.
Okay. But I'm assuming,
Others do.
like you said, there's others, yeah. There's more severe ones, I suppose.
A spinal injury. You could... That's how Moxie lost her hand. It's critical injury. Dismembered limb. Hand gone.
Fun times.
Yeah. Yep. The GM was really nice and said it didn't have to be my dominant hand. So... there was that. Still bad. Still bad. Trying to remember, I think in another battle, I saw someone get crushed fingers and a broken leg. So he had 2 critical injuries he was dealing with. So yeah, stack, not fun. So now we'll talk about wound states and death saves. Now that we've dealt or received all this damage, what does that mean? So, your hit points are divided into essentially 3 wound states. Lightly wounded, seriously wounded, and mortally wounded. Lightly wounded is anytime you're between full health and half health. You have no penalty that comes with that wound state. Seriously wounded is when you are equal to or less than half health. At this stage, you take a -2 to all checks. So any attack that you're making, if you're trying to grab someone, that's going to be at a -2. If you were already grabbed, you are now at a -2 from the grab penalty, plus a -2 from the injury penalty, putting you at a -4 total.
Oh, no.
Uh-huh. If you had that torn muscle from before and you were making melee attacks, your torn muscle is a -2. Once you hit seriously wounded, that's an additional -2. Your melee attacks are now at a -4. And then mortally wounded is when you have less than 1 hit point. That is those 4 reasons. So when you are less than 1, when you are essentially bleeding out and dying, you take a -4 penalty to any check that you are attempting to make, a -6 to your move for a minimum of 1. So if you only have 4 points in your move stat, it's not going to be a negative, it's just going to drop you to 1. And that's when you start making death saves. You are less than 1 hit point, you have 0. Now you are fighting to stay alive in hopes that someone comes and stabilizes you. Death saves occur at the start of each of your turns when you are in the mortally wounded wound state. To make a death save, you roll a d10. If you roll under your body stat, and it has to be under, cannot be equal, must be under, you live and can take your turn as usual with the above mentioned penalties. Otherwise, you fail. If you roll a 10 on a d10, you automatically fail your death save. If you fail your death save, you are dead. 1 life, that's all you get. If you die, you're gone. Don't get to the mortally wounded state. Or Blaze of Glory and make it frickin' epic. Now, every time you roll a death save and succeed, before you have too many questions, the penalty increases. So every future death save is made with a +1, accumulating +1, making it harder to stay alive. So if you have a body of 6 and you succeed, your next death save, whatever you roll, is +1. If you save a second time, it's your roll +2. And you're always trying to get under 6, right? If 6 was your body stat. Additionally, if you're in the mortally wounded state and you take damage, you suffer a critical injury, and your death save penalty increases by 1. If someone is in melee combat with you, they get a rate of fire 2, which means you take 2 critical injuries and your death save penalty goes up by 2 for that round. The penalty continues until you either die, obviously, or until you're brought back to 1 health point via stabilization, and that will reset your death penalty. So if a crew member comes in, succeeds on the stabilization check, all those penalties go down, you're at 1, you move back into that seriously wounded state. And then hopefully you GTFO. But that's up to the player. Questions about death saves and wound states?
No. No, pretty summed it up there. I mean, it seems about. I mean, it seems pretty blanketed. I mean, it's once you go from perfectly healthy and take your first bit of damage, there's you're still fine till you get to the halfway threshold. Then you start like, okay, now I'm not feeling too great. Then you start realizing it's like, okay, I'm a little sluggish at this point. Start feeling things are a little, not as not as spry as you was when you were fully up there. And then you get to the the okay, maybe I shouldn't have dove off into this alleyway with 13 people by myself. And you start regretting life's choices for a little bit while you're laying there mortally wounded.
Yep.
But so.
But edge runners live on the edge, and if it's worth it to your character to look badass and cool and run against that enemy knowing you're gonna die.
Well, all I can say is trench coat with a Hawaiian shirt. Let's go.
Yeah. But if you become really attached to your character, maybe stay away from the mortally wounded and stay as best you can. Lastly, for combat, not all combat requires weapons. Facedowns are another type of combat that rely on one's ability to persuade the other one to back down in order to succeed. In a facedown, both participants are going to roll their cool stat plus a d10. If there's a tie, nothing happens. Otherwise, the loser has to back down or take a -2 penalty to any and all actions made against the winner until they have defeated them once. So if you're, say, in a pool hall and, you get bumped and the guy's like, I don't like you either, and you face them down, you could avoid a tavern brawl if you succeed. It doesn't mean that the person's going to necessarily back down like a wimp. They might be like, you're not worth my time, and just sit down grumpily but let you carry on your way. But you've at least successfully avoided combat. Or you could smooth talk them, however you want to, handle it cool, wise, or make some roundabout logical argument that's not really logic, but you lose them midway and they end up just going, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And you can avoid it that way. So not all combat needs to be with weapons. There are moments where face down could work.
Okay. So basically the face down is what would he equivalent to that of the silver tongue's way of getting out of a situation?
Possibly, yes. It's a little more than that because technically you have your persuasion skill check, right? So you could try that. Face down's a lot more kind of aggressive. It's that standoff, both gunslingers have their hands on their gun, stare down of just who's gonna flinch first, and that will pressure of one-on-one, I'm gonna force you to back down because you don't want this, and I'm going to push that presence onto you.
Oh, okay. I got you.
It doesn't have to be presence. You could say words, but it's mostly generally one-on-one. You don't feel lucky today, punk, back the fuck off.
Right. So it's basically who's the bigger dog in this situation.
Yes, and you want to prove to them that you are.
Got it.
And if you fail, you're aware that you are not the bigger dog, and you either back off or you take a -2 to all actions against this person until you succeed, until you beat them.
So rule of thumb, if you cannot beat them, do the craziest thing you can and beat them anyway.
And try to face them down. Yeah, 100%. I can't beat you with my weapons, but I am crazy and you don't want this level of crazy.
I can't beat you outright, but there's a tanker there full of gasoline and I have a bullet for it that's incendiary.
And that is essentially playing the game. That covers your skill checks, covers your combats. Those are your mechanics. Everything you'll need to know. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling like I could take one of these pre-made characters and do a face down and not get my armor ablated.
Yeah. 100%. That tracks, yeah. Love it. That's great. And that concludes then. If you have no questions, I don't see any questions in chat. I don't believe. Nope.
Let's see.
That will conclude this episode of Night City Sofa.
I guess I do have one question.
Yeah.
Who's ready to play?
Cyberpunk RED up. Let's go. Such a great game. Such a great game. I love it so much. But thank you so much for joining me today, Easy. I appreciate it. If you want to just
Always happy.
Remind everyone where they can find you and where they can follow you.
Oh yeah, well you can find me over at Twitter. You can find me here on Twitch. I stream time to time, not super frequently at the moment, but you can catch me here and there. And at the moment you can also find me over on YouTube on Demon and Dice. But that's about it for now.
Awesome. As for me, I'll be here. Or I'll be over on Saves for Death playing some Cyberpunk RED tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern. So, you want to see a game in action, come hang out. As for our Let's Learn Cyberpunk RED Easy Mode, we're going to do the last bit, part 3, in February, when we go over character sheets, the life path system, and the pre-written gig, or mission, that comes with the book. If you're a player and you don't want to be surprised, come for the first half, and then don't let the game be ruined for you in the second half. As for next week, next Friday, January 31st, I will be reviewing the Cyberpunk RED January DLC, the Night City Atlas, with the one and only Jay Gray, who is the line manager for Cyberpunk RED. So he's going to come on and he's going to help review and answer, hopefully, a bunch of questions and give a little more insight to the locations and gangs that are in the Atlas. I highly encourage you to pick it up. It is completely free. You can grab it on our Talsoriangames.com/downloadable-content. I would say click the link in chat, but my links aren't working. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can click the link in the video description below, because that will be working. And yeah, if there's anything that you guys want to see discussed or covered, please let me know. And until next week, stay frosty.
And take it easy.